It had always been the same, the dust in the air as the car rolled up the gravel path, the buzzing of cicadas that droned like an old radio left on in a far room, and the creak of the shutters as Jules opened the windows of the old house his grandfather had built stone by stone. The sea was just beyond the hill, its salty breath lingering in the wind that brushed the olive trees. Every year, the house waited for him like an old dog, patient and silent. But this summer, it was different. He felt it before he even unpacked. Like a tremor in the soil beneath his feet, something unspoken but potent had already begun to shift. His father was coming with her Sophia. He had seen photos, of course, she was all over his father's phone, all over his father's conversation during the awkward calls they shared every other Sunday. Younger than his father by almost 2 decades, Sophia had the kind of face people remembered. Not for its perfection, but for the feeling it gave them. Wildness maybe or danger. Jules had tried not to care. But the idea of her brushing her hair in the room that used to belong to his mother made something ugly stir in him. So he arrived early. He cleaned the kitchen, stocked the fridge, opened the windows. He wanted the house to feel like his again, like before. Before Sophia. When they pulled up, his father in his old convertible, top down despite the blazing sun, Sophia beside him wearing round sunglasses and a red scarf in her hair, Jules stayed on the porch. He didn't wave. She stepped out of the car like someone stepping onto a stage, barefoot, tanned, wearing a white dress that clung to her skin in a way that made Jules instantly aware of how thin his tolerance was. She was laughing at something his father had said, that easy, open laugh that came from people who had never been hurt badly enough to guard it. Jules hated her for it. Hated how natural she seemed, how young she was, how she kissed his father's cheek and then turned to him with a smile that made him forget, just for a second, what he had prepared to say. "You must be Jules," she said, offering her hand. He ignored it. Later, he would say it was the heat that made him stay. The kind of heat that makes thoughts melt and morals slip. But that first week, it was only boredom. Sophia was everywhere, lounging by the pool, dancing barefoot in the kitchen, disappearing into town and coming back with bread and wine and stories from the bakery where the old women gossiped about her like she was some wandering siren. She didn't belong to the village, and she didn't pretend to. She belonged to herself. Jules watched her, quietly, always from a distance, his judgment folded into the folds of his books, his headphones, his long walks to the cliff's edge where he could breathe. But Sophia was curious. And curiosity, when it's that kind, always smells weakness. She started with questions. Innocent ones. "Do you swim at night? What's that tattoo mean? Why don't you ever talk to me?" Jules gave her nothing, then came the games. It began with a swim midnight. She woke him by splashing water against his window. When he opened it, she was already in the pool, the moonlight catching her shoulders. "Come on," she said. "It's a dare." He should have said no. But the air was thick and his bed was too hot, and maybe some part of him wanted to see if he could still say yes to something unpredictable. So he climbed down. Swam in silence, watched her float when she whispered, "I dare you to kiss the bottom of the pool." He dove without thinking. After that, it was scooters on winding roads with no helmets. It was breaking into the abandoned hotel by the sea and dancing in the ballroom with music playing from her phone. It was vodka stolen from his father's cabinet and drunk on the roof while the stars spun above them like reckless gods. It was secrets exchanged not in words but in looks that lingered too long, laughs that meant something else. It was games. Always games. Each one more dangerous than the last. She was testing him. And he was failing beautifully. One night, on the edge of sleep, she whispered the final dare. "Don't fall in love with me." She smiled like a fox. "Bet you can't." And he should have laughed. Should have rolled over and gone to sleep. But his mouth went dry, and his heart betrayed him. Because by then, it was already too late. The days bled into one another like spilled wine on a white tablecloth, messy, impossible to clean without leaving a stain. Jules found himself waking up later, eating when he remembered, and always aware of Sophia's presence before he saw her. It was as if the house itself had adjusted to her rhythms, her laughter echoing through the walls, her scent, a mix of salt water, sunscreen, and something floral, lingering long after she left a room. His father, oblivious or willfully blind, spent his days in town handling business and came back only in time for dinners on the terrace. Those dinners were quiet, strained. His father talked about investments in property, his voice always slightly louder when Sophia brushed her hand along his arm, while Jules ate in silence, pushing food around his plate, his appetite slowly being replaced by something far more dangerous, curiosity. Sophia treated his father like a passing thought, a necessary fixture in her summer rather than the man who had uprooted his life to fit her into it. Jules noticed the way she barely listened to him, how her eyes wandered to the horizon, to the darkening sky, or occasionally, to Jules himself, as if checking whether he was paying attention. He always was. That was the worst part. It wasn't until a particularly heavy afternoon, when the air felt thick enough to drown in, that Sophia's games escalated. She appeared in the doorway of his room without knocking, wearing one of his father's shirts unbuttoned over a swimsuit. "We're going into town," she announced, as if it had already been decided. Jules looked up from his book, a sarcastic remark sitting on the tip of his tongue, but she cut him off. "You're coming with me." It wasn't a question. They rode his father's scooter, Sophia driving recklessly, hair whipping in the wind, her laughter lost in the roar of the engine. Jules clung to her waist, feeling the uncomfortable heat of her skin beneath the fabric, trying to keep his mind somewhere else, anywhere else. She drove without direction, weaving through narrow village streets, ignoring red lights, ignoring everything. They didn't stop until they reached a cliff overlooking the sea, where the land seemed to fall away into nothingness. Sophia hopped off the scooter and stretched, the sun turning her skin golden. "Do you ever think about just leaving?" she asked, staring out at the water. "No plans, no promises. Just disappearing." Jules wasn't sure if she was asking him or herself, so he said nothing. But she looked at him then, her eyes sharp, almost daring him to challenge her. "You seem like the type who likes control," she teased, lips curling into that familiar, infuriating smile. "I bet you've never done anything reckless in your life." Jules felt something tighten in his chest, anger, shame, desire. He couldn't tell anymore. "You don't know anything about me," he muttered. "Maybe," she said, walking closer, her bare feet kicking up dust. "But I know enough to see you're afraid of yourself." She leaned in, close enough that he could feel her breath against his ear. "Afraid of wanting something you shouldn't." For a moment, everything stopped, the cicadas, the wind, even the sea seemed to hold its breath. Jules swallowed hard, unsure if it was fear or anticipation coursing through him. He stepped back, breaking the tension, his heart pounding like a war drum. Sophia only laughed, satisfied with the crack in his armor. "Come on," she said, grabbing his hand and pulling him toward the cliff's edge. "I want to show you something." They climbed down a narrow path he hadn't known existed, rocks scraping against his palms, the sea growing louder with every step. At the bottom was a hidden cove, secluded and untouched, the kind of place you found once and never told anyone about. Sophia stripped down to her swimsuit in one fluid motion and dove into the water without hesitation. Jules stood there, staring at the ripples where she had vanished, feeling like he was watching someone walk through a door he could never open. "Are you coming?" Her voice echoed from beneath the surface, playful but distant. He hesitated before finally giving in, peeling off his shirt and diving into the cold water. It shocked his system, clearing his thoughts for the briefest moment. When he surfaced, Sophia was already floating on her back, eyes closed, body swaying gently with the waves. "You know," she said, eyes still closed, "I used to think love was something that just happened. Like a wave that pulls you under. But now I think it's more of a choice. A dare, even." She glanced at him, eyes gleaming mischievously. "Would you ever take that dare?" His throat tightened, words catching before they could form. He didn't answer, and she didn't push. Instead, she dove underwater again, leaving him alone with his thoughts, with the growing realization that this was a game he was already losing. That night, Back at the house, everything felt louder, the clinking of cutlery, the ticking of the old kitchen clock, his father's voice booming about some business call. Sophia sat quietly, swirling her wine, her eyes flicking toward Jules every now and then like they shared a secret no one else could see. When his father retired early, claiming exhaustion, Sophia stayed behind, lighting a cigarette on the terrace and staring out into the darkness. Jules wanted to leave, to lock himself away in his room and pretend none of this was happening, but something kept him rooted to his chair, his legs heavy, his heart heavier. "Do you ever wonder what your life would look like if you made one different decision?" she asked, not looking at him. "One small thing that changes everything." "All the time," he admitted, surprising himself. She exhaled smoke into the night air, her gaze distant. "I think I'm still waiting for that moment. The one where I finally make the wrong choice." Jules swallowed the knot forming in his throat. "Maybe you already have." Sophia looked at him then, her smile slow and dangerous. "Maybe I have." The days that followed blurred into a haze of stolen moments, shared glances, whispered jokes, and the suffocating awareness of something forbidden blooming between them. Jules found himself seeking her out, despite himself, despite every warning screaming in his head. She pulled him further into her orbit with every dare, every reckless adventure, until his world became something unrecognizable, chaotic, intoxicating, and terrifying all at once. It wasn't until his father announced he would be leaving for a few days, work, always work, that Jules realized how far he had fallen. The house would be just the two of them. The thought alone should have made him pack his things and leave, but instead, it sparked something dark and thrilling inside him. A possibility he had been too afraid to acknowledge. The night his father left, Sophia found him on the rooftop, staring out at the sea. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him, the air heavy with things unsaid. "Do you want to play another game?" she finally asked, her voice softer than usual. Jules didn't answer, but she took his silence as agreement. "This one's simple," she continued, turning to face him fully. "We pretend none of this matters. That tomorrow, everything goes back to normal. But tonight, we do whatever we want." He knew then that there was no going back. No undoing the tangled mess of feelings that had wrapped themselves around him like vines. He was already too deep, and Sophia, beautiful, reckless Sophia, was the only thing he could see. "Okay," he whispered, the word barely leaving his lips. She smiled, stepping closer, her fingers brushing his arm in a touch so light it burned. "Don't fall in love with me," she reminded him, eyes glinting in the moonlight. But they both knew it was far too late for that.